Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got 5 running backs to buy post Week 2 NFL action and heading into Week 3 of our fantasy football seasons. These are either players that I see that their stock dipped a little bit after some down performances here in Week 2, or I just see the potential upside and potential breakout performances for these running backs booming here in the very near future, so you want to take advantage of this and go out and target these players here before they reach that upside and then send their trade value and stock through the roof and make it dang near impossible for trading for them down the road. So with that being said, drop down, click that subscribe button if you're new around here. We'd love to have you guys help us get to that 2,000 subscriber marker and keep growing this SFS community. Go check out all the links in the description of today's episode as well. There's a ton of different community involvement stuff and other ways to take advantage of us as a resource here for your fantasy leagues this season and get that extra edge for your teams. With that being said, give today's video a like and let's hit that intro and get straight in to our first running back. Alrighty, here we go. So my first name up on the block for today's episode is David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears here. David's not necessarily one of those big ticket players that you drafted in the first or second rounds of your fantasy leagues, but you were most likely acquiring him in the late third or early fourth round of 10 and 12 team leagues. So he's still a significantly valued player, but someone I still find that we're going to be able to go out and trade for. Very impressive in Week 1 with the Bears taking on the Rams on the opening night of Sunday Night Football. But in Week 2 here, we saw some regression. We saw a little bit of drawback. His numbers reduced and declined. And ultimately, I think that's a product of him not scoring a touchdown here. But I think it presents a very unique opportunity for us to go out and target a workhorse running back for an affordable price that could pull the wagon for us this season. Chances are a lot of leagues out there are going to have Damian Williams, his handcuff option, available on the waiver wire. So not necessarily something you have to go out and do and target, but just an option and something to note if you do want that added element of insurance policy and security. If you're going to go out and make a trade for one of these running backs, obviously running backs can go down just like that. So if you want that extra level of security, go see if Damian Williams is available on the waiver wire in your leagues. But that's besides the point here. David Montgomery, the actual player, his talent, the volume, the usage, that stuff that he brings to the table is what makes him such an intriguing option for me this week. He had the exact same stat line on the ground as Dalvin Cook did in Week 1 against this Bengals defense. So what that tells me is this is actually a very underrated unit against the run, and this is actually a relatively stout defensive front. That seems weird for me to say. We're talking about the Bengals here, right? But 20 carries for 61 yards, back-to-back weeks. That's what David Montgomery output, and that's what Dalvin Cook output. The only difference being that Dalvin Cook scored a touchdown in that matchup. But why do I feel really good, and what makes me feel so comfortable with David Montgomery moving forward with all that said? So 23 total touches, meaning he caught 3 passes on top of that rushing value he brought to the table. Those are workhorse numbers. Anytime you're finding someone who is cracking that 20 total touches per game barrier, that's an elite level of volume that we don't see in today's game all that often from a lot of running backs out there. Matt Nagy wants to use David Montgomery's skill set to the team's advantage, and this is a player who can literally do it all, from running on first and second downs to change the pace of the game, to break out and make explosive runs happen. He's got the physicality and the size to be used on the goal line as a potential high-volume touchdown scorer. He brings every unique fantasy asset and tool to the table that you could be looking for. And to me, that's something that's invaluable to look for on the open trade market when, again, he had a slightly down performance, so his value hasn't completely tanked here. He still did have 8.5 fantasy points in half PPR scoring this week. But going forward, I expect a lot more top 12 numbers from him in the future, and I think his floor is very, very safe considering the production he had this week in what you would consider to be a down week. So David Montgomery, go out, make a fair offer for him. There's going to be players I'll probably put out a must-sell running backs list for this week. Those are all going to be opportunities and options to try and trade for Montgomery in exchange for him, rather. So if you want to just get a jump on that, though, you can drop down in the comment section below ask me for your specific team in trade situations, who should I give up for David Montgomery, or if you've got any other non-related trade issue that you want my advice on, put that in the comment section below. I'd be happy to help and offer my input into your league's trades. The number 2 player I've got here is Javonte Williams. Time's running out, guys. We have got to pull the trigger and take advantage of his stock being as low as it's going to get. The last 2 weeks, the trends that I've been seeing is leading me to believe we are getting closer and closer to Javonte Williams' takeover of this Broncos offense. The touches have been dang near even the past 2 weeks. And the one thing that was very telling for me this week that we didn't have last week was Javonte and Melvin Gordon both struggled a lot in week 1. Neither of them were overly productive. Neither of them were very efficient, but they were playing a very stout Giants defensive unit. And there we go, the classic SFS sirens, if you guys just heard that. I apologize for that. Javonte and Melvin Gordon both got stacked up and bottled up against the Giants defense. That was something to be expected. They have a very good front 7, and that's a very, very tough opposition to be playing, especially in week 1 when offenses tend to be a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of the defenses seem to be a little bit more on the same page and playing as a cohesive unit early on in the season. Last week, Melvin Gordon rattled off a 70-yard rushing touchdown in the fourth quarter that kind of blew the game open, sealed the win for the Broncos, and made on paper the appearance and the results of that game look as if Melvin was by far the better rusher and the more efficient player in that game, when they really wasn't the case. They were neck and neck. Neither of them were all having all that much success through the first 3 quarters of the game, and then Gordon gets that big run to cap things off. This week, neither of these players had a massive breakout run. Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon both saw the ball in the rushing attempts category, so pure carries. We're just talking about being handed the football. Both had 13 rushes. Javonte Williams had 64 rushing yards to Melvin Gordon's 31. So he had over double the amount of total yardage output. And then if you do the simple math, 64 divided by 13, his yards per touch was that much better than Melvin Gordon, who again only had 31 yards. So Melvin did have 1 more touch total on the game because he did have 2 receptions to Javonte's 1. So you're talking 15 total touches to Javonte's 14. But when this is neck and neck and you see Javonte having increased success on a per touch basis, we are slowly going to see this thing flip the other direction, and Javonte is going to take over more and more of this backfield. And the closer we get to late in the season, when this team is heating up, when they're ready to unleash him, Javonte Williams will eventually become a workhorse running back and potentially a league-winning player because of that upside he's going to possess late in the season. That's something you don't want to miss out on. This is potentially the cheapest player you can go out and target that has this much value long-term for fantasy lineups. Go out, make an offer for him. If he's available in your leagues, there's no reason not to go out there and at least, at minimum, make an offer, because you never know when someone's going to accept it, how low their asking price is for it. Just test the market, see what you can do, see what you can get done out there. Antonio Gibson, this hasn't been an overly flashing pick, and he's a player who I was incredibly high on in draft season. I am not ready to give up on Antonio Gibson, just yet. He's so dynamic. There's so much opportunity to be had in this offense. And he had another down week this week. I would actually say week 1 wasn't a down week for him. He pretty much just hit his floor and had an average showing. He had over 100 yards from scrimmage. This week, though, only 7 fantasy points and half PPR scoring, 69 rushing yards. Nothing all that flashy, nothing all that exciting, all that exceptional. He didn't have any work in the receiving game, which is a bit of a red flag because all that went to J.D. McKissic. But the main thing that I chalked that up to is that Giants defensive front. We just talked about how tough they were against Melvin Gordon and that Broncos offense. I think Washington kind of just looked at the landscape of the game here and said, well, we know we're not going to be able to run the football super effectively. Let's try and get the ball out in space. And although Taylor Heineke was their quarterback, they ran a lot of play-action passes and just tried to get the ball pushed downfield because that's where they were attacking and ultimately having success. And then, they pulled that game out by they probably should have lost that game, but, Dexter Lawrence jumped off sides. That's besides the point. The Washington football team ended up winning that one. But going forward here at Buffalo this week, I expect a heavier dosage of the run game. I don't think they want to have Taylor Heineke have to throw quite as many times as he did. Having a strong and steady run game to lean on here with Antonio Gibson being such a dynamic threat, having the capability of scoring touchdowns in the red zone, catching passes out of the backfield, and doing all these unique things that his skill set allows him to, should give him a crazy high ceiling here down the stretch of this season. We saw him dip into that ceiling last year. I've talked about this many times so far this fantasy season, but you see on the screen there, finished as RB13 last year while missing some games. A very, very productive player. He just needs to get back into a rhythm and back on track here for this season. Alvin Kamara. Now, this is our first big ticket, big name player on the list for today's video. This is easily going to be the hardest for you to actually acquire. But if there's a time to make an offer for a top-end fantasy player, the time to do it is right after they have their worst game of the season and essentially bottom out for the worst case scenario for fantasy production and scoring. Something that's really oddly encouraging and unique to see about Alvin Kamara this week, he had 4 fantasy points in half PPR scoring. That is terrible. Like, I don't even know what he finished as in terms of just the pure running back department for players that would have placed above him in total point output for fantasy scoring, but it's a long list. There's a lot of guys that produced better than Kamara did this week. Nonetheless, the Saints were a disaster. Did you see that play where Jameis Winston boots out to his left, chucks the ball downfield while like half somersault cartwheeling over? LASIK surgery really did a number on that man. Holy cow. I mean, he absolutely shredded my Packers last week, but this week he looked like he was completely dazed, confused, and lost against the Panthers. Kamara, despite all that mess, and again, the raw statistical output is not impressive at all in terms of the actual yardage he had, but Alvin Kamara still led the Saints in catches, targets, and scrimmage yards. That is crazy to me. So he's technically still the most productive Saints weapon, despite the meltdown and awful performance they had this week. I don't think it's going to get to that low of lows again here. This is a player who I argued before the week started was immune to game script and was immune to the score that was up on the scoreboard because he could be used as such a dynamic pass catcher out of the backfield and whatnot. Clearly his floor is a little bit lower than I anticipated it being, but at the end of the day, this is the one player in the Saints offense that I think we can still depend on week over week going forward here. Very out of the norm for Kamara to produce such low-end numbers. Again, try to go out there, make an offer for him. You never know what's going to happen. You're probably going to have to give up something significant in return, but at the end of the day, you can still win this trade by doing so, and by targeting a player of this caliber, you could be getting your hands on the difference maker that could just go out there and make a huge impact on your league and your team specifically. And then Saquon Barkley, while he is also a big ticket player, while he is also a name that might not be the easiest to pry off of fantasy owners, he's probably by far also the most polarizing player I'll have on today's list. There's going to be people, I know it, in the comment section that are going to say, yeah, I'm out on Saquon. I refuse to trade for Saquon. I don't blame you. I understand where your concern comes from. I understand the fact that Saquon Barkley looks like a really dangerous game to play right now, and he looks like a very scary fantasy situation. But I saw flashes in that Thursday night game, and that's something that makes me feel good about him. A long week of recovery, a long week of preparation. He's still acclimating himself mentally to the game. I can see it out there. He's not quite running with the physicality and the confidence that we've seen from him in the past. But when he found daylight, he ran for 40-plus yards on a play. He's still quick twitch. He's still explosive. He's still one of the best athletes in the National Football League. I know he still has what it takes to get the job done and to be an elite-level producer. I've said it countless times throughout this offseason and early on this year already. He is a one-touch scoring threat, and that is pure fact. No one has the capability to touch the football and just beat everyone else man-to-man on the field and take off and score a touchdown. I mean, Derrick Henry can do that, but he has to do it by steam plowing over everyone else on the field, and we saw him do that multiple times this past week. But back-to-back down weeks, Saquon hasn't been truly unleashed yet by this Giants offense. 10 carries in week 1, 13 in week 2. These aren't those workhorse numbers that I pointed to in the first example here with David Montgomery, where he's getting 20-plus touches per game. Saquon will get there, though. He's the focal point of this offense. They will go as far as he and Daniel Jones can take them. And right now, it's looking like Daniel Jones really needs Saquon Barkley back because this team does not trust Daniel to put the ball in his hands enough times per game to ultimately go out there and score the points that they need to win football games. So Saquon, sooner than later, eventually will be taken off his pitch count here. He will be sent back into that lineup to touch the ball 20, 25, 30 times a game. And he will make a big impact in fantasy leagues. Those first two matchups were also brutal. If I don't add that, I'd be doing a discredit to the fact that those performances weren't all just a product of his low touch count, but also the fact that the Denver Broncos and the Washington football team are very stout defensive units, crowd the line of scrimmage and made contact with him on frequent occasion very early on in the play. So things will get easier. It's not to say that Saquon's schedule this season is a cakewalk and that he's just going to storm through teams the rest of the year. There's probably going to be some other ugly games in here, but the ceiling is so ridiculously high with Barkley that I don't see how, if you get an offer at the right price, why you'd pass up on him. If you could probably find yourself in a situation where you could go out and trade for Saquon Barkley and acquire his services as your team's RB2 if you're already strong at the position. That's a luxury that I think you would be a fool not to put yourself in that situation. And so for that reason, I'd go out there, target the talent, bet on the player. The offensive line isn't amazing. We already know that, though. He's produced with that line in the past. Just, if you're a Saquon Barkley owner, I would encourage you not to sell him. I think that there's more value for him on your team. Obviously, there's situations where there's deals that are too good to pass on. But at the end of the day, I still think this is a player you want on your team for the long haul here this season. Alrighty, those were 5 must-buy running backs here for Fantasy Football Week 3 action. Let me know your thoughts on the players down in the comment section below. In addition to any questions, comments, concerns you have about your fantasy teams, I'd be happy to help you out there. Or if you go check out our premium membership package here on the SFS channel, SFS Gold, that's linked in the description of today's video. You can check out our weekly positional rankings and get access to me setting your lineups on a week-to-week basis and helping you get the edge in those fantasy leagues and pull in those league championship trophies by the season's end. So thank you all so much for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys tomorrow with a few episodes lined up that'll be posted right away in the morning for you. So make sure you got that bell on so you're not late for those, and I'll see you there. Peace out.